and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. Over the past years, Ukraine has become quite attractive for foreign investors, although there are still obstacles remaining. Which are they and what needs to be done to overcome them? To talk about this, we're joined in the studio today by Danyil Bylak. He is the head of Ukraine Investment Promotion Office. Hello and thank you for coming.
Pleasure to be here.
So what is Ukraine Investment Promotion Office? What does it do?
We were created about a year ago by the Cabinet of Ministers, by regulation of the Cabinet of Ministers. It was the Prime Minister's way of really trying to promote investment in Ukraine. This was his initiative. It wasn't something that donor agencies said that Ukraine needed. And our job is to basically provide turnkey services to investors. We try to identify who they might be. We try to tell them about the different sectors that we have in Ukraine. And once they come into the country, we support them in terms of the meetings that they might have, taking them into the regions to meet the most appropriate places for them to invest.
Any particular projects you're especially proud of?
Well, we actually had to start by identifying a strategy, and our strategy was to focus on existing investors first. There are many very excellent global firms in Ukraine, and some of them have their own issues here, whether it's with law enforcement agencies, government bodies, etc. And we identified the fact that if we could help them, we would unlock investment that is already in the country to stimulate further growth. And this has actually been quite successful. We've probably worked with companies to unlock almost $700 million of additional investment in Ukraine this year. At the same time, the reason we adopted the strategy was that if we can show that existing investors are happy campers, it's much easier to sell Ukraine to new investors.
Is this the only way you attract investors in Ukraine?
Well, as I told the Prime Minister, I wasn't going to do any roadshows until we had actually something to really talk about. And I think that what we've really tried to do over the course of this year was to try to shift and change the narrative about Ukraine.
In what way?
Well, when I started, I was appointed in November of last year. There was this general view that Ukraine is corrupt, that it's not moving anywhere on reforms, and it was stuck.
It basically is still the same view. How did you try to change that?
I don't think so. I think that there is. It's a view among certain talking heads and among the Western press, which sometimes I get the sense is almost like an echo chamber. You can never be criticized for reporting bad things about Ukraine. But, we also have to be realistic. Where we were 3 years ago, we'd lost 20% of our GDP, 60% of the value of our currency, 7% of our territory to a war of aggression, and we had less than $15,000 in our current account, and 70% of our trade, which was with Russia, had to be reoriented to the West. And today we have economic growth. We have the reforms which are moving. The Prime Minister and the government set out 5 key reforms at the beginning of this year. 3 have already been passed: education, pensions, which is IMF compliant, and health reform. Healthcare. And so this is important because the market needs to understand that things are moving. We are still a work in progress. Ukraine is not a normal country with a corruption problem. Ukraine is building a nation. We are, the same time as we're deconstructing the Soviet edifice, the institutions that we inherited from the Soviet Union, we're building new institutions. We don't have our own national institutions to fall back on. It's like, the analogy I use is taking a huge cruise ship like the Queen Mary, trying to build it while you're at sea, with a very small handful of skilled people in the middle of a hurricane.
This is what you compare these days Ukraine to, right?
Well, this is what I'm talking about building the country as. And, and it's a compelling story because it's one about growth and trends and moving forward. The perfect example of how it's working is that when Ukraine went to the capital markets to put its bonds for sale, it was 3 times oversubscribed and actually drove the yield down. So, the market has said, okay, we buy the story. We buy the fact that Ukraine is moving forward. We buy the fact that it's stabilizing. but we want to see more, which is fine. I mean, this is exactly, there's lots more to be done.
That's logical.
Well, it's not, it's logical, but it's also the fact. I mean, what is not the fact is that we're stuck and nothing's moving. You know, people are very focused on the corruption issue, and justifiably so. You know, you cannot have a economic growth without a stable legal system and rule of law, right? But there's two ways to fight corruption. The first way is you arrest people and put them in prison, which is what most of the media and even investors are focused on. But there's another, almost more important way to fight corruption, and that is through transparency, through building institutions in your government that promote transparency and certainty in business. And we've done that. We've got the Prozoro procurement system, which has been rated as one of the best in the world. We started e-declarations for all of the civil servants and government officials. When the e-declaration system came into place, 25% of Ukraine's judges quit instead of having. So that's a process to stimulate legal reform in one sense. We have the automatic VAT returns, which has really destroyed the main corruption schemes in the country. So in this way, we are building, you know, and we do outreach with the government. We're trying to build the legitimacy and credibility of the country. Bottom line is, what do investors want? Investors want to know that I can make money and that my investment will be secure. The other stuff is...
Exactly, but what kind of spheres are they interested in most right now?
We have a 4+1 investor or sector strategy to talk to investors about.
What is a 4.1?
You don't get any points for guessing what they are. The first is these are the key economic drivers of the Ukrainian economy: agribusiness, manufacturing, infrastructure, and energy. And we have innovation technology, which informs all four of those sectors. My line to what we try to promote to investors is innovation and opportunity. That Ukraine is a country of tremendous innovation and tremendous opportunity. And the framework for that is what I call brains and grains. These are the two greatest assets that we have in the country. We have the intellectual and the human capital of our people, which are top drawer. I mean, we are the third largest. We've gone from nothing in the last 5 years to becoming the third largest, one of the third largest IT hubs in the world. And a third of all of our experts are IT and technology related.
And that is impressive.
Well, it is impressive, but it also changes the way people look at what's going on here. And that's also a challenge, for example, in the agribusiness sector, because even though we are such a powerful player, and we are going to continue to be a powerful player in this age of food security, we're still at the bottom of the value chain. We're still producing grains and shipping them abroad, even though we're doing it in huge quantities. We need to get investors moving up that value chain into crop processing, food processing, etc. Well, it's happening already. I mean, you bring people. First thing is to get them in the country. We just started a campaign with Qatar Airways. I took a 2-page spread in their in-flight magazine for the next 6 months, and every month we will showcase on 2 pages something about Ukraine. And our promotion video is just coming out this week, investment promotion video. And again, it's focusing on the innovation, the opportunity. What I want is for an investor who knows nothing about Ukraine to say, wow, I think I should check that out. Once we get them in through Boryspil, once we get them into Kiev, once we go out into the regions, they see the country very differently.
Over the course of the past 3 years, has the number of, or the amount of investments grown? Well, what is the dynamic? Is it positive? Is it growing?
No, it's absolutely growing. You know, look where, as I said, look where we were 3 years ago. You know, that does great damage to your brand when people think of you in terms of corruption and conflict. So what we are trying to say is that, look, we are now a European country. We've signed the EU Association Agreement. There are advantages, especially if you're an Asian country, of setting up operations. We have a number of very large things we can talk about publicly, for example, with General Electric, GE Transport, in terms of the modernization of the locomotive fleet for Ukrzaliznytsia. the state railways. We're working with Greenbrier on a big American company in terms of building new freight cars in Ukraine. And we've had, because we have one of the most attractive green tariffs in the world, we have huge renewable energy projects in wind and solar from Chinese companies, Japanese companies, European companies, Middle East companies from the Gulf states, and we're talking 500, 600 megawatt projects. One is a gigawatt project. It's 1,000 megawatts. These are huge. This is the electrification of millions of homes. This is for to drive business and in fact to export.
Looks like Ukraine is going to boom and bloom.
Well, we're hoping. I mean, the energy is also a key driver because this is the lifeblood of an economy in terms of moving forward. And you know, we need to focus on what kind of an economy we want to have into the 21st century. Western countries are going through a very painful process now of disruption, technological disruption. Probably more so than at any time since the 19th century. And the institutions that are in the West, I was born in a small Western Ukrainian village called Toronto, and I know that you know, the political system in the West, the economic system and the educational system are still rooted in the 19th century. So you have a middle class that's kind of lost now. And,
I would agree to that.
And we don't have that problem because we don't have a middle class yet. But the point is that with our brains and our grains, it's a driver for the other sectors, is that just like with mobile telephones, we went from the automate under the roadways to mobile phones. We didn't start digging trenches to build stationary telephones.
Yeah, we invented
and in the same way, we can build with Industry 4.0, agriculture technologies. Ukraine can become in the 21st century a modern, dynamic leader, in fact, in these areas where we just jump over the problems that are going to be facing Western countries.
How does the government help the office?
We've had tremendous support. I report to the Prime Minister. I'm the director of Ukraine Invest, but I'm also the Prime Minister's chief investment advisor. And I've had absolutely open access. The Prime Minister, I don't think there's been a Prime Minister in independent Ukraine that has done more outreach to business than Prime Minister Groysman. We meet with business all the time. We consult. We've actually resolved a number of important issues, systemic issues that are blocking business. We gather it all. We realized part of my job in Ukraine Invest is to speak with business and understand the systemic blockages, bottlenecks that we have in the system. One of the things that we did was we gathered all of the major business associations with the Prime Minister, talked about infrastructure problems. And one of the biggest problems was portovi zbory, the port fees. And as a result, the government is going to cut the port fees by half starting January 1st. We now want to do the same thing with land permitting and usage, Oblenergo hookups and things like that. So there is a real desire on the part of the government to move things forward. You know, we have our biggest challenge, of course, is on rule of law issues, especially with respect to the reform of our law enforcement agencies. But, you know, this is the deep state. You know, Ukraine is right now a country that's going through enormous transformation. And it's going from transformation of this sort of kleptocratic Soviet-era state to a democratic European country.
Which cannot just happen
And it doesn't happen overnight.
Right?
We're a country of 46 million people, the size of France. You know, you just don't wave a magic wand and all these things happen. And of course, every totalitarian system has based its power on the deep state, on the security agencies. They're always the last to be reformed, but we're doing it, and and we have a lot of people inside those agencies. We've created new institutions like the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU, the Special Prosecutor's Office, that are very effective. These things, all these prosecutions that people and arrests that people read about, 3 years ago, this wasn't possible.
Of course.
So it's a democracy is messy to begin with, and a transition is always something that you have to keep your eye on the ball. And we have these ultimate objectives, and we're working towards achieving them.
Thank you so much for such an informative conversation. Thank you so much for coming, for finding time to come. That was Danyil Bylak. He is the head of Ukraine Investment Promotion Office. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.